I am here with my good friend Ian Reifowitz. He is my colleague at Daily Kos, one of the more prolific writers out there, and the author of 2 books that I know of, probably more, but three books. 3 books. Well, the ones that I know of, the first one that I know of is Obama's America. That was a really good seller, real good book. And he has a new book out, The Tribalization of Politics. And there you go. But you know what? I am having Ian on the show some other time to discuss that book. Today we have sort of a disagreement, and you guys know how politics, what we believe in politics done right. We believe in talking, discussing. I want to be convinced. Ian wrote a very in-depth piece at the Daily Kos. It was on the front page on Sunday. I told him, wow, it was one of the better pieces that I saw on the Ilhan Omar subject. And you know what? I want to discuss this with him in detail. I want him to tell me why I am wrong, why I need to look at things a bit more differently. So what I'm going to start with is his article. Ian, please tell me the premise of your article, first of all. What is it that Ilhan Omar did wrong?
First, let me say that disagreeing with you is painful for me. Because, no, I mean, you and I are on the same page, not only in that we are both left of center, but I think you and I have both argued for the Democratic Party to be on the left of center. So, you know, but we, you know, we can always discuss things and we can always try to be educated by one another. I think that's important. So let me bring up the article just so that I can see the specific points that I wanted to look at. So the issue here is not that Representative Omar criticized Israel, because there's nothing wrong with criticizing Israeli policy. There's nothing wrong also with criticizing the U.S. relationship with Israel. Both of those things are open to criticism, and I think most progressives would do so and should do so, and I have done so, and I do so in the piece that we're discussing today. I think the Israeli-U.S. relationship, especially under President Trump, is far too close. I thought it was, you know, the fact that this president, for example, unilaterally moved our embassy, U.S. embassy to Jerusalem, was a disastrous move, and it was a foolish move, and it was a provocation, and it was very unfair. So those things go without saying, although now we've just said them. So the point is, it's not about criticizing Israel. All right. So my post wasn't about the Israeli-Palestinian situation specifically, but it was about the specific language that Representative Omar used in making those very reasonable criticisms, at least overall reasonable criticisms. I don't want to say that I agree with her 100%, but for the most part, I think her criticisms were on point. So let's talk about the specific language. There are a number of specific tropes that have been used and are used by anti-Semites to disparage Jews. Not everyone is fully aware of them. That's certainly not something that I would expect. But I would expect that a member of Congress would be fully aware of them when speaking about Jews and about Israel. Representative Omar already twice this year, just since being elected, has had to apologize for previous use of anti-Semitic tropes. She tweeted out something in 2012 and then was called out on it around the time of her swearing in, I believe just after her swearing into Congress, and then she apologized for that tweet. Then about 2 weeks ago, she made another remark that evoked anti-Semitism, which we don't need to go into the details of.
Actually, let me tell you, Ian, for me too, I think for my sake, I think we do need to go into the specifics of what she said, because, and I want you to teach me why that is anti-Semitic. Remember 2 things. I don't have the American history at birth. I'm from Central America. So a lot of, I'm wondering after I read your article, and I don't know if I have said something that could be construed as anti-Semitic, in as much as, you know, I am, you know, that's, for me, that's just a religion. So go ahead. So
the 2 previous occasions, and you'll see why I bring this up, but the 2 previous occasions Representative Omar used some anti-Semitic tropes, and then did a terrific job of apologizing. She said, I was wrong. I shouldn't have done that. I know better. I bring those up because it matters in that the incident of this past week wasn't her first incident. So the point is, after the first two apologies, one would hope that she would have become more familiar with all the possible anti-Semitic tropes. There aren't that many, there are maybe 3 or 4, but apparently that wasn't the case. So let's talk about the incident from this week, and we'll go into some specifics.
Okay.
So she was talking about Israel and talking about Palestinians and talking about the U.S. I'm just looking for the exact quote. I have it in my post. She was talking about the U.S. relationship with Israel, all things that were very reasonable. It was clear what she was talking about. I mean, I'm not going to read you a 10-minute long quote, but he was talking very clearly about Israel and the Palestinians. She recognized that Jewish Americans care about Israel. She was very empathetic towards them, which is why I don't believe she really is anti-Semitic. I think this is really just about a matter of being educated. So she talked about that. And then she went to a place where here's the quote that got her into trouble. All right. So she says, what I am fearful of is that because Rashida, and she's referring to Representative Rashida Tlaib, who is also a Muslim American, a congresswoman from Michigan, because Rashida and I are Muslim, that a lot of Jewish colleagues, a lot of our Jewish constituents, a lot of our allies go to thinking that everything we say about Israel to be, she meant is, anti-Semitic because we are Muslim. So that's one sentence we can unpack a bit. That's not the part that's anti-Semitic, but that's not the real problematic point. So let's go on to the next sentence. Okay. And then she goes on to talk a little bit more about intolerance. And then she gets to the point where she says, talks a little more about Palestine, excuse me. And then she says, so for me, I want to talk about the political influence in this country that says it is okay for people to push for allegiance to a foreign country. And then she goes on a little bit to talk more about a powerful lobby, which is making it clear that she's talking about AIPAC. But those really are the key words, those 5 words, allegiance to a foreign country.
Let me stop you right there. Let me stop you right there. And
Perfect.
Please help me out here. Let me tell you what it looks like to somebody that's neither Jewish, Christian, or anything else, or Muslim. I'm a humanist. And explain to me, please, because that you said that is an anti-Semitic trope. Isn't that something that one would say to anyone with respect? Let's say I'm a Panamanian. I was an original Panamanian. And let's say anything that I talk about Omar Torrijos Herrera, who was our dictator, and I supported him or whatever, do you think she would have used that same terms towards me? Like, your allegiance shouldn't be to Panama any longer, but your allegiance is to the United States. And I say that in this respect. And please forgive me for my ignorance if I have one. My question is, don't you find it true that when you start to pass laws specific to a particular country that does not apply to others, that there's some sort that implies some sort of a special relationship there?
Oh, sure. So you asked a couple of questions in there. So let me go back to the first one. I think she, certainly my sense is, like you, was educated in another country. She could have, she could have educated herself a bit better. But my guess is, and my sense is that she did not do this in a hateful way. She may not have understood the history of that particular slur, and I think we can talk about that. So I mentioned in the post, this is a slur or a slander or whatever you want to call it, a trope that goes back to something called the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which is a forged document that was produced around 1900 by the Russian Secret Service, for lack of a better word. I forget the exact phrase, but the Russian secret police. It was a forgery produced by them to discredit Jews. It's written as if it were written by a secret cabal of Jewish leaders, the Elders of Zion, and it describes how Jews are planning and plotting in secret in all the various countries of the world, especially the great powers, to take over the world. And it makes it very clear in this forged document that Jews are not loyal to the countries they live in, that they're lying about being loyal to the countries that they live in, but they're really loyal to world Jewry. And the Protocols of the Elders of Zion may not be known to the average person in the United States right now. I sincerely doubt
I didn't know about it.
I sincerely doubt they're talked about in Central America.
Right. I just learned about it with this incident.
Right. So it's something that is very, very well known in anti-Semitic circles, and then because it's known in anti-Semitic circles and anti-Semites impose themselves on Jews throughout history, Jews know about it as well. It's a huge red flag. It's almost the equivalent of blackface for Africa.
Right.
Right. Maybe some people don't know about blackface, but African Americans are a much larger percentage of the country.
And I want to stop you right there, okay? So here's the thing, and I'm so happy that you brought up blackface, right? Because I'm a black person, but I'm not African American. I'm a black Latin American person. Now, the big hoopla about blackface, I adapted in what I write just because of the way people react in the United States about it. But for me, it was neither here nor there. I understand that it had history, okay? My question to you as a Jewish person, but a newer one, a younger Jewish person, is do these tropes, you know what I mean, do these tropes ever die? And by us, and help me out here, by us keeping on, like you brought up the Zion, what is it called? Something of the Zions?
Protocols of the Elders of Zion.
Right. By us continuing to fall back on these issues and not ever letting them die, right? Do we restrict ourselves to having, for all these different ethnicities and identities, running the risk of, in our vocabulary, like somebody from, like myself, running the risk of having to apologize eternally, because, like I said, I mean, I have no loyalties to ethnicities, if you will. Okay, you are Jewish. I'm a humanist. The president of one of the organizations that I'm in, his dad is completely against Omar. In fact, when I wrote something saying I think they should leave Omar alone, he commented on my Facebook page, and I immediately did a show with him because I wanted him to be able to air his side on my platform, which I had already gone against. So, I mean, just like I'm asking you to come on after you wrote what you wrote. Now, I understand that. So I really understand why, in your eyes, it is a trope. My question to you is, given that I don't have that life experience, what are we supposed to do? And later on we can go into a bit deeper. What are we supposed to do? I don't know.
I think it's a great question, and I want to address it in a couple of ways. One, I think we have to hold, for lack of a word, regular people to a different standard than we hold elected officials. If a regular person posted a comment somewhere or said this in a casual conversation, you might say, oh, by the way, you might not want to use that phrase going forward because you might not have known this. And honestly, you could, to some degree, you could do that with Representative Omar as well. Having said that, elected officials do need to be held to a higher standard, especially in this case because this is her third incident. I think the interesting thing about your friend and his father and that whole conversation about your friend who said, I'm closer to her positions than my father is, I'm closer to her positions on Israel. I'm closer to Representative Omar's positions on Israel than I am to AIPAC's position on Israel. I mean, I'm somewhere in between the two, but I'm closer to Representative Omar. And this is the larger point I make in the piece. People, certainly progressives, want to be able to criticize Israel and need to be able to criticize Israel, and that criticism is important and helpful. We want them to be able to do so, having learned how to do so without stepping into an anti-Semitic trope or landmine. And really what it comes down to is this. Criticize Israel's policies. Don't criticize the motives of American Jews or Jews in general for supporting those, who might support those policies. Call the policies wrong. Don't say Americans who support those policies are disloyal to America or have allegiance to a foreign country. Say they're wrong for supporting those policies. But when you get into motivations about loyalty, you're getting into motivations that Nazis and that the Klan and that right-wing Americans today use as words and ideas to slander Jews. And so to this larger question of how do we, can we just let them die? It's not up to the people who are calling out anti-Semitic rhetoric to let it die. The fact is that white nationalists, the people who made the rally in Charlottesville and others on the right are still using those tropes, and they mean it when they say it. I don't think Representative Omar meant it when she said it. If they would let it die, it would be less of an issue, certainly. But it's still pretty easy to criticize Israel without criticizing the motives of the people who support Israel, or of Israel, of Jewish American supporters of Israel. So stay away from motivations about loyalty to other countries, and educate yourself. Representative Omar, it shouldn't take more than a few minutes, frankly, to make a short list or get somebody to give you a list of easy things to avoid. So what we don't want to do is give more power to the intentional anti-Semites on the right, the white nationalists, the people who organized the rally at Charlottesville, etc. And then there's one other thing that's important. Not just Representative Omar, but there have been other incidents of anti-Semitism, or let's say anti-Semitic rhetoric, because I don't want to say that a person is an anti-Semite, but let's say anti-Semitic rhetoric that have come from the left, from people of color, and then also in other parts of the world, in Europe, even worse than in the United States, people on the left, in the UK, for example, in the Labour Party, where the UK and the Labour Party has become, unfortunately, really more tolerant than is acceptable of anti-Semitism, and some Jewish Labour members of parliament have left the party. What we want to make sure is that in the United States, that Jewish progressives, Jewish Americans at large, but most Jews in America are progressives, as we discussed, 75–80% of Jews vote for the Democrat in a given election. We want to make sure that they know that their party is not going to allow itself to become a home for anti-Semitic rhetoric. That's really important. And so if this week was painful, but the result of it is that Representative Omar really has become educated and that we don't see anti-Semitic rhetoric from elected officials on the left, that's important in re-cementing, because everything is always needs to be re-cemented, re-cementing that feeling that Jews know that the Democratic Party and the progressive movement is not going to allow anti-Semitism. That's really important, just as it doesn't allow it doesn't allow Islamophobia or racism against African Americans or any other group, which is why I think the resolution was a good thing in the end, because it did a number of things. It highlighted anti-Semitism. It specifically talked about the anti-Semitic trope that Representative Omar used, but it also the resolution also brought in a condemnation of Islamophobia, of racism against African Americans, and a number of other important forms of bigotry. So I looked at it as, the week started out with people wanted a resolution against anti-Semitism alone. I call what happened a resolution against anti-Semitism plus other forms of racism, connecting them, making it clear that none of them will be tolerated. I think in the end, although the week was painful, that was a good result for the progressive movement and for the fight against bigotry in general.
We need to have more people making that statement like you just made. That is very important, because the spin on the right is that somehow Nancy Pelosi watered down what it's all about. And what you said, especially speaking as a Jewish person, is a very important statement for us to get out there. That actually, in fact, what it shows is a magnanimous statement, is that we understand that racism or whatever ism isn't just a Jewish thing. It's more than that. Now I want to explore something that you said in passing, because you mentioned about what Corbyn is, the Corbynization of the Labour Party and what it really means, whether he's anti-Semitic or not. I am not sure about that. But what I want to talk about is, you mentioned also people of color and anti-Semitism. Explain that a little bit to me, because I think you kind of glanced over that and not go in detail as I think you want to.
Right, I think it's an important point. Let's say something very clearly first. Anti-Semitism in the United States is concentrated on the right wing. It comes mostly from the right wing. It comes mostly from white nationalists, white Christian anti-Semites. They are the greatest threat in terms of anti-Semitism, in terms of a physical threat to Jews, the rhetoric that motivates hate, the rhetoric that even motivates violence. We saw that in Pittsburgh, where 11 people were murdered at the Tree of Life synagogue. The person who committed that murder was spouting anti-immigrant rhetoric and blaming Jewish liberals essentially for there being too much immigration in the country. So let's make that really clear. Okay, but that doesn't mean anti-Semitism only comes from the right. Now, I think the anti-Semitism coming from the right is more intentional, and I'd like to think, and I do think in Representative Omar's case, that when anti-Semitic rhetoric comes from the left, it's less intentional or possibly unintentional. I think Reverend Louis Farrakhan is a sort of a separate case. Whether you want to call him left or right is an open question. But he is certainly a person of color, and his anti-Semitism is intentional. There's no question about that, because he does it over and over and over again over 30 years to talk about Jews being termites who need to be exterminated. That's very different from what Representative Omar said, obviously. So since there is some anti-Semitism coming from the left and or coming from people of color, I think it's useful to have a dialogue and hopefully educate the people who don't mean it so that they don't do it, so that they don't spread it. Because even if Representative Omar doesn't mean it, and I don't think she does, people hear it. And that anti-Semitic rhetoric goes in people's ears and affects their thinking about Jews and in a hateful way, again, even if unintentional. I talked in the piece about anti-Semitic violence in New York City, which was even worse, frankly, than I had thought. So anti-Semitic hate crimes are about half of all hate crimes in New York City, whereas Jewish New Yorkers are only about 1/8 of the population. So that's a 4-to-1 disparity, which
wow,
is
yeah.
And I bring up New York because New York's population is overwhelmingly Democratic. It's about 55% people of color. So it's certainly, you know, the numbers suggest that certainly a decent chunk of those hate crimes, sadly, are being committed by people of color. So the point is, Representative Omar is a leader. People of color, as well as progressives, are listening to her, and she's certainly far from the only one, as we've mentioned. And so, if people who on the left are making anti-Semitic remarks, and people are hearing those remarks, and they're committing anti-Semitic acts of violence, that's a bad thing. And anything we can do to reduce the level of hate and of violence is a positive. And so it's not about singling out Representative Omar specifically. And this is the larger point I made in the post. It's about, this is a conversation progressives are having amongst ourselves. What will we tolerate in our own house? We're not delusional enough to think that we can make Donald Trump change his behavior and change his rhetoric, or make the Ku Klux Klan change their behavior and their rhetoric by saying, don't do this. But we would like to think that our fellow progressives are empathetic to us as Jewish Americans, as victims of hate, and that they'll hear us and they'll educate themselves and they'll say, okay, we're going to avoid this. If that's the result, and I think that's why one probable result of this week, then we'll be in a good place. I want to believe that Representative Omar has spoken to some people who can educate her, and that going forward, she'll avoid this kind of rhetoric. And as long as she does, I don't expect there to be any need to bring up the matter again with regards to her specifically.
What I really appreciated about your article, Ian, is you were measured, and not only that, you did it not only with conviction, but you also made space for others. You made space for the misunderstanding of how people saw things. You made space for, well, you look at it differently than I do. Now, let me tell you, what you've taught me today is that we need to look at with respect to how Jewish people and those who considered these anti-Semitic tropes, is that it's not the intent, but not questioning one's loyalty, etc., when making these statements, and making that very clear in that one should not do that. One should make sure about the intent. Now I'm going to throw something right back at you real quickly with asking the expectation that the same fervor that's placed into the issues where it covers Jewish people, because the Jewish having the one thing that we can say about Jews as a culture is that they make sure to fight, given its history, makes sure to fight that the first time there is a scratch, it doesn't turn into an infected sore. And I think it is important to place that on all these different identities. You know, they always say that Democrats play identity politics. Okay, you know what? That's true, because we are full of different identities, and they have different each of these identities have different issues. Once we realize that, I think we can blend them in such a manner that we are all each other's great defender. And in this, consider me one of your great defenders. Ian Reifowitz, thank you so kindly, first of all, for your article. Thank you for coming on with me to discuss this issue on Ilhan Omar. I think we've left this in a very good place. We are with Professor Ian Reifowitz, who is the author of Obama's America, and upcoming book. What is that book? I want to see that book. The Tribalization of Politics. Ian, thank you so kindly for having been with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Berto. It's always a pleasure talking with you.